Everybody loves a good redemptive story. It excites us. It drives us in a lot of ways. Spider-Man in of itself is a redemptive story of kinds. We're very familiar with the story of Peter Parker receiving the words, "With great power come great responsibility." However, we're also familiar with the fact that he never fully grasped the idea that until after he did not take up the responsibility to stop a simple crook, which led to the death of his Uncle Ben. His becoming Spider-Man was his attempt to redeem what he had done. He can't fix his past, but from this point forward, he can move on and be what his uncle had asked him to be, had encouraged him to be. Good person. Last week, we talked about the effect of choosing good versus choosing to do evil and the effect that has on people around us. But what if you're an individual who has lived a perpetual lifestyle of doing wrong, of doing evil things, but now you've decided to do right? You're turning yourself around and you're trying to be a different individual. How do we deal with the pain and the emotional scars of that? There's another Parker who embodies this very scenario perfectly. His name is Kaine Parker. His identity is Scarlet Spider 2. Hello, devoted geeks. Welcome to Geek Devotions, the show from devoted geeks who are devoted to letting you know that you are loved. I'm Dallas. I'm so glad you hit the play button today. If you're new to our show, we take geek pop culture items like movies, video games, and comic books, and we use them to let you know that you're loved. So if you don't watch past this moment right here, know this. We love you. Care about you. There is a plan and a purpose for your life. Don't give up. Ladies and gentlemen, as we continue down Geekmas 2021 with a Very Spidey Christmas, we're talking about one of my favorite characters today, Kaine Parker, the Scarlet Spider Part 2. That's right, Part 2. There was another Scarlet Spider, Ben Reilly. He's actually one of my favorites also. But we're talking about this one today because of what we talked about in the intro, because he has a really, really interesting redemptive story, a story arc where he grows and becomes a hero of sorts. Now, for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with Kaine Parker, there's a lot to this backstory, and not at all at the same time. Kaine is the very first clone of Peter Parker, but he was also a failed clone, and that failure led to the person who created him to mistreat him and really cast him to the side. So that emotional trauma tagged on with the fact that because he was a failed clone, his body was literally falling apart. Kaine suffered great mental issues, like he was really struggling, and he went on this quest of trying to frame Peter Parker because he thought Peter Parker was the clone that Ben Reilly was, but Ben Reilly thought he was a clone, but he was actually Peter Parker, but he wasn't Peter Parker. It's confusing. If you want to try to figure this out, go check out the Clone Saga. It's on Comixology. I'm sure your local comic book shop can order it for you. It's a lot. The main thing is simply this: Kaine, he went on a murdering spree. Like, he was killing people left and right and leaving what he called the mark of Cain, where he kind of left a burn image on people's faces. The reasoning for that is because he knew that his fingerprints were the same as Peter Parker, thus Parker being framed for murder. And Kaine was flat out just not a good guy. Very violent, very evil. But later, much later, Kaine reappears in an event called Spider Island, which was a crazy story arc that involved people getting spider powers and evil spider queens. It was wild. Bottom line was, bad news, call in the Spider-Men to save the day. Spider-Men and Spider-Women, they were there too. But Kaine shows up, interesting enough, in an attempt kind of to redeem himself also. And at the end of that story, he does the impossible. He saves Parker and dies in the process. Kaine stepped in, he sacrificed himself. Now, through a series of other events, he got resurrected. He got better. And because comic books, that's what happens in comic books. But in this new life, in this new process, Kaine moves off to South Texas, trying to lay low. And in the process of doing this, he can't help but do certain things. Help people. There's something inside of urging him, saying to do better. Spider Island opened his eyes to a new life that he could have. And he's legitimately trying to do right. But he's still struggling with the emotional scars of who he was in the past. Which leads to a really interesting moment in issue 1 of Scarlet Spider, Volume 2. In this moment, Kaine is looking in the mirror, and he's kind of monologuing to himself, and he says this: the scars are gone. The degeneration is gone. But for the first time in my life, I'm not dying. For the first time in my life, I realize I don't have to be the man I see in the mirror. I may not be able to forget my past, but I can be someone better. This simple line sums up the story of that entire book, which, if you want to read it, I highly recommend this story. You get it on Amazon, you can check it out on Comixology and other places. But it sets up this whole thing of him trying to be better. But at the same time, he doesn't forget his past. He knows that he did wrong. He knows that the things he did were terrible. The scars that he speaks of weren't just the physical scars from the degeneration. They were emotional scars. They were mental scars caused from having a life of villainy, of choosing to do wrong, of living in hatred, of living in anger. So he has to deal with these throughout the entirety of the story. There's a lot of people out there, maybe you included, who you've lived a lifestyle that was wrong, and you know it was wrong. You did things that were legitimately terrible. But now you're legitimately trying to do right. You're trying to be a better person. At the very least, just not do those terrible things you used to do. But the past keeps coming up, and it keeps bothering you, and it keeps attacking you. There's a lot of people I know that they feel like that once they've started this new path, they've decided that they're going to become Christian, they're going to serve Jesus. They have this mindset that because they've done so much in the past, that God doesn't actually love them, and that there's no real hope for them. Like, they're saved, they're going to heaven, but God doesn't have any blessings for them. They can't grow. They can't be really better. They're always stuck in the echoes and the shadows of their past. But that's not the case. That's just simply not true. Looking at even just the biblical examples of the people that we see that have chosen to live and follow Christ, they carried baggage. Stuff that was dark and crazy, but yet they've gone on to do great things. I want to give you guys just two examples I find in the scriptures of this. One is the Apostle Paul. Now, Paul, at one point in time, was called Saul. He was a hardcore guy. Like, he was very learned, like he was intellectual to the nth degree, but he also had a lot of power. He had a lot of pull. And in the days of the early church, he was not a believer in Jesus. In fact, he was in charge of persecuting the Christians. He was literally the guy signing death warrants, leading groups out to capture, round up Christians, and sentence them to death, if not kill them himself. And he did this with great zeal. He really thought he was doing a good thing until he encountered the Lord. All of a sudden, he has this revelation. The very people he's been trying to exterminate were people that were right and that he is now serving, and he is now doing the work of the ministry also. Now, we don't have a scripture that says what his thought process was, but what I do know is human nature. I know that when we have a change of heart, a change of mind, we worry about what we did in the past. As he did ministry, as he went out, he had to remember everything he did wrong. In one of his very first encounters after accepting Jesus as his Lord and Savior, he comes across a group of disciples, not the 12 disciples, not the apostles, but other believers in Jesus, and they refused to see him. They refused to have them in their midst because they thought it was a trick. They thought that he was going to try to do something shady and hurt them in the long run. They had no trust in him. And Paul had to think about that. He had to live with that. There are people who knew him before Jesus, who knew the terrible things he did, and they weren't going to trust him. He had to prove himself to them. So he goes on, he goes to be with the apostles who walk him through some stuff. I imagine that they probably discipled him. They walked with him. They prayed with him. They wanted to make sure that this was a legitimate thing. This whole, hey, I'm a Christian. I'm a good guy. I'm not doing terrible things anymore. There was a process of walking him through that, and that's understandable. But it was also a time of healing for him. Coming to grips with the fact that he did terrible things, and now he's got to live with that, but grow and become better. What did he do? He went on to write the majority of the New Testament. He became one of the biggest leaders in the early church. To this day, we talk about him at great length because of his influence in the church itself. This man who was out to destroy it is now one of the earliest fathers of it. There's another person I want to point out, and his name is Levi. Now, Levi was a tax collector, which, granted, we don't particularly care for tax collectors on a good day, right? But this is a big deal because Levi was a tax collector who was a Jew. Now, why is this a big deal? Because in Jewish society, he was looked upon as a traitor, as someone who betrayed his family, someone who was willingly working for the enemy, but also on top of that, taking some side money. He was benefiting from doing harm to his own family, his own people. In Jewish cultures and society, he was probably shunned by his family, by his parents and other folks. He was looked down upon as being a sellout. Yet one day he encounters Jesus, and Jesus simply says, "Follow me." And he does. He gets up and he follows Jesus. He walks away from everything he had and follows Jesus. Now he's walking away with the memories of everything he's done. People see him on a regular basis saying, "Aren't you the guy who used to rob me blind when I was just trying to pass through?" He had to live with that, but he walked this out. He became someone who was discipled and grew. What did he do? Well, his name is Matthew. See, it's not uncommon for people to have two names back then. Levi was also Matthew. It's the same person. And he wrote the very first gospel that most people read when they go open the Bible and they go to the New Testament, the book of Matthew. He wrote that entire thing. He was literally one of those very apostles who walked Paul through what it's like to be restored and redeemed. See, Paul and Matthew, they knew each other because, again, Paul was discipled by them. And I can only imagine, again, this is all speculation. I don't have any grounds to say this was or was not. But I can just imagine, I can see Matthew looking at Paul and going, "I know what it was like to betray my own people. I know what it's like to have family members and have people look at me with disgust because of things I did in my past. Let me show you grace. Let me walk you through this." This is my encouragement for you guys. If you're someone who has lived a past where you've done some terrible things, legitimately, I want you to understand there's grace and forgiveness. You are forgiven. You have been restored and redeemed by Jesus himself. Yes, you have to deal with these scars. Yes, they're there. You have to deal with these memories. But you can be better. They don't have to hold you back. They can be a monument, a testimony of how far you've come in your walk with Christ and becoming the man or woman that God has called you to be. And to those of you in the church who, you're having to help disciple these individuals. You're having to help people who have lived traumatic pasts, have done things in their past, and they're working through these things. You have to have grace. As much grace as Matthew had for Paul when Paul came to them going, "I need to be discipled." Why? Because your sin is no greater than the sin of anybody else. In the eyes of Christ, it's all the same. But here's the deal. Jesus looks at them, and you know this, you understand this, right? Jesus looks at them and says, "I've forgiven you. I've restored you. You are my son and daughter. You are part of this family." If Jesus himself can look at them and say that, who are we to say otherwise? Who are we to deny them of that? We should treat them like sons and daughters of the King, brothers and sisters in Christ. We should be championing them and helping them, discipling them, helping them to become who God has created them to be, with grace and with love. That is the mission of the church. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Geek Devotions. I hope it's encouraged you and challenged you. Your question of the week is simply this: who is your favorite tragic character who's been redeemed? Leave a comment down below and let me know, because I love to check them out. I love these type of stories. They get me excited, so leave a comment, let me know. I also want to remind you guys, it's not too late to order your very own Very Spidey Christmas t-shirts that we've been selling. They're going to be available for a limited time. After Christmas, they won't be on our store. So if you want one, order now. I also remind you that if you call Revival Signs, who the people who make all of our stuff, you can special request all of our designs on mugs, on hoodies, and other things. Just got to call them up and talk to them, and they'll work out the pricing with you. I also want to give a very special thank you to everyone who supports us, either by praying for us, by just reaching out to us, encouraging us, but also people who support us monetarily. Our amazing, devoted Patreon geeks. You see them on the screen right here, right now. Every one of these individuals help support us for as little as $1 a month through Patreon. They help us to keep things going here at Geek Devotions. They'll pay for our website, hosting our podcast, getting the materials we need, upgrading the equipment so we can make better content for you guys on a regular basis. The fact that the sound right here sounds amazing is because of you guys. Like, you guys, literally, you guys have helped us to build this up, to create quality content, to encourage people and help them to take their next step with God and let them know, most importantly, that they're loved. And if you want to become a devoted Patreon geek, visit our website, geekdevotions.com, click on the support page. You can become a patron, or if you want, you can just give a one-time gift. Whatever it is, we appreciate it. But if you don't want to do that, or you can't, we appreciate you anyways. We appreciate your prayers. We appreciate you being our friend. That's key to us here at Geek Devotions, just being friends. So we love you guys and we appreciate you. Also invite you to check out all of our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're putting out stuff all the time. Just look for Geek Devotions on all those platforms, where we do Bible studies, we do play and praise on Twitch, all kinds of great content all the time. Like, I'm so excited about where we are right now, whereas where we were several years ago, because it's amazing, guys. We have writers, we have podcasters on our team. God has helped grow this ministry in a fantastic way, and we are humbled and blessed to have the people surround us that help us do this, to reach people. So make sure you check out all the stuff we have coming out. Until next time, stay devoted, peace, and love.